Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Can you please put a plus in the chat box if you can? Lovely. So looks like you can. All right. Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. So first of all, welcome to the webinar devoted to teacher talking time. I'm really happy to see so many people here, almost 100, and the numbers are increasing. And it's interesting that the participants are from different even countries like Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, and Greece. So thank you very much for joining. And I hope the webinar that you're going to watch today will help you with TTT. So first of all, before we start, a few things about what we're going to be doing today. So actually, when we talk about teacher talking time, I think this is something that almost everyone is familiar with, right? But we'll still look at what it is and what types of TTT we know. So basically, how to recognize it in a teacher's speech. We'll also dig deeper into the reasons and possible consequences of high TTT or excessive TTT. And we'll talk about different problems, different reasons and effects of TTT. And we'll also talk about TTT in a little bit different way, from another perspective, when you look at it, let's say, from a quality perspective, rather than just the talking time. Before we start, a few important things. So I muted your microphone, so unfortunately you cannot participate with your voice, but we have a chat. So that's why if you have any questions during the webinar, or if you have some comments, so please feel free to write your comments there. I'll be looking at the chat box from time to time. And you can keep your camera off. Right, you can keep it on. It's everything is fine, right? A few important things. So if I don't answer your question during the webinar, I'll try to look at the chat box from time to time, and I'll take some time at the end to answer the questions. And also, after the webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the webinar recording and a certificate to attendance. So basically, you will have evidence of at least getting better at understanding teacher talking time and how to improve it. So shall we start? Can you please put a plus in the chat box if you're ready? Okay, lovely, lovely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So when we talk about teacher talking time, there are a few things that I'd like to share with you before actually we focus on it in depth. So I don't consider myself an expert in theory of teacher talking time because I'm a trainer, so I have to do with teacher talking time in practice. So that's why I'll be telling my way, my view, my perspective. And it actually means that you might have a different view and opinion because we all have different experience, right? So that's why if you have a different view or a different perspective on things that I'm sharing here, so please feel free to share them in the chat box. All right. So first of all, if we talk about TTT, in the chat box, please type a few words, what you think is TTT, and why is it a problem generally? Let's say a maximum of 5 words. Let's take a minute for that. So what is TTT and why is it a problem in general? Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, lovely, lovely. Excellent, right. So teacher talking time, less STT, student talking time, stealing students' time. Nice comment, thank you. Right, demotivating, lovely. Okay, teachers talking more than students, right. Yeah, so I agree with your comment. So basically, when we talk about TTT, we talk about quantity, right? So basically, how much a teacher talks during a lesson, right? Or amount of time. And when we talk about TTT, we usually compare it with STT, student talking time. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that we need to balance teacher talking time on the one hand and student talking time on the other hand when we talk about teaching and learning, so that both processes actually are successful in the classroom. I like your comments regarding the reason, and I think that basically the problem might be how much is too much, and when this TTT is necessary and when this is unnecessary, right? The problem with high TTT or unnecessity is about being misunderstood, right? And this leads to so many other different things. So here's a quotation by David Treadle, which I really like in terms of that, right? And when we talk about teacher talking time, because it's unnecessary and we have too much of it, right? We actually can consider it as blah, 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 from the student's perspective. And actually, in some way, when there's a lot of TTT, students might hear some white noise or something that they cannot recognize fully or do not understand fully. And when we talk about teacher talking time, and actually too much teacher talking time, you can imagine an overpacked suitcase, right? So when we talk about going on a journey, we of course want to take with us as much as possible, right? But does it mean that the suitcase can hold everything we can take? Not really. So the same with TTT, there is some limit to how much we say, right? And basically, if there is too much of TTT, there won't be an appropriate result or effect. So that's why this overpacked suitcase is a very good metaphor for excessive or too high TTT. When we talk about teacher talking time, I think that everyone has had experience with it, right? And I'd like to have a mini survey with you for you to tell me either privately on chat or publicly about your relationship to TTT. So if you think you have a problem with TTT, but you're not sure, write 1, and then have a look at 2, 3, 4, and 5, and just send 1 number to me in the chat box, please. Okay, right. Oh, it's interesting. So as I see here, more than half are 2 and 3. We have occasional 5s, some 4s. Right. Okay, interesting. So if you've got a 5 here, I don't think that this webinar will be useful for you, and it's a joke, right? But I'm really happy that many of you actually have 2s and 3s, so it looks like you're going to get something useful. And it actually means that TTT poses something like a problem for many of us. And basically the numbers that I can see here are evidence that you are interested in this and interested in knowing more and actually working on that. So now let's look at different kinds of TTT and basically what we call TTT. And by this, I mean kind of types of TTT. So you're going to see 6 examples of teacher talking time. And I'd like you to bear with me and react in the chat. So first, look at the example and decide what's wrong with this TTT? Why we call it TTT? So what's the problem? Long structure, too wordy, right? Yeah, when we talk about too wordy, this is a general problem with TTT. Maybe you can recognize something more specific with it. Yeah, hello, Olga. No imperatives, a good point. Right. And if we look at basically the language here, right, it looks like a person saying this is trying to be polite. Do you agree with me? Yeah, exactly, Anastasia, too polite. Yeah, and that's basically the meaning that I have here. So the teacher saying this is trying to be too polite, right? And when we talk about, for example, the effect it might have on students, right? Lower level students, because of the many words here, right, will not recognize the message or what the teacher is trying to say, right? The first part is quite long and we can shorten it. All right, great. Now let's look at another one. So please share your comments in the chat. Might sound sarcastic, interesting. Okay. Right. A nice comment from Victoria, running commentary. Introduction to the action, right? Exactly. So on the CELTA course, we call it running commentary. This is what we say when we comment on what we are going to be doing, on what we are doing. So for example, when we talk about an offline classroom, we can say, now I'm taking a marker and writing a sentence on the board, right? So this is something that is taking some time. It might not be useful to the students because there is nothing important for students to know about it, at least here, right? Because we can just demonstrate the handout and the students will see that. So we are commenting on our actions, and pay attention. This comment is directed towards the teacher. I'm going to show you, which makes it not very useful for the students themselves. Lovely. One more thing. So all the examples I'm going to show you are about excessive or too much TTT. So all of them by default are too long, right? Let's look for some other things in there. Number 3. So what's the problem here? Lovely. I see here lots of people from CELTA, at least knowing CELTA or having been through this experience, right? Yeah. So Helen, your enemies, right? Okay. Yeah. So here, the problem is that the teacher has listened to the student, but instead of giving a quality comment reacting to what the student has said in a good way or maybe communicative way, the teacher just repeated back what the student said. And we actually call it echoing, right? So a little bit later, we're going to be talking about the reasons of echoing and the effects of echoing. But now let's look at another one. So what's the problem with TT here? Yeah, repetitive repetition. Yep, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the only thing is that this is not just a repetition. If you look at the second sentence, it's a rephrased first sentence, right? So it's repeating the idea, but saying it in a different way, right? So I'll call it rephrasing or paraphrasing, right? So still we're saying the same thing, but in other words, right? So again, it adds to our teacher talking time, right? We'll talk about the reasons why a little bit later. Next one. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And this is actually repetition, right? Repetition. Yeah. So saying the same thing twice, exactly. And one more thing that I'm going to show you is a very interesting example of teacher talking time that might go unnoticed. So have a look and take some time to think before you comment in the chat. So commenting irrelevant information from the teacher, overtaking speaking time, off topic. Okay. So many interesting ideas. Thank you. Yeah, so actually your comments actually make sense, right? And let's look at it from a different perspective a little bit. So when we talk about the teacher's comment, right? So looks like the teacher is overtaking the time and gives something that isn't really relevant to the student's answer by saying something about their opinion, right? So we'll call it topping up. So basically covering what the student has said, right? But it's not about developing the conversation, right? So for example, if we say something and then ask the student a question, then it might mean developing a conversation. But here it's about covering what a student has said with our own idea, opinion, and in this way finishing the dialogue, right? Which might seem irrelevant in this situation. So for example, when we talk about this situation, there is a very interesting effect. So when we top up what students might say, right, or what they say, even repeating in a way what they have said, right, students might get less confident because they might feel that they said something wrong and the teacher corrects them, right? So this is a possible negative effect of this topping up. And when we talk about topping up, this usually happens at the feedback stages. So where we actually comment on how well students have accomplished the task or when they answer our questions. All right, now in the chat box, can you please choose 2 examples of TTT that you think you have experienced or you have problems with? Write just a few words, please. Okay. Okay. Lovely. Okay. Yeah, looks like we have lots of D. Right. Okay. Right. Rephrasing. It's interesting that many of you, some of you actually notice F. F is actually topping up is something that usually goes unnoticed, as I mentioned. And so thank you very much for your comments. So I see that there is a big variety of things that you think you need to work on and have experience, which is great in terms of being aware, right? So the first step of any actual problem is being aware of the problem, right? Yeah, so it looks like D is the most problematic point, rephrasing, at least based on what I see in the chat box, right? Okay. So now you have looked at a few examples or most common examples of teacher talking time. One more example that isn't reflected on this slide is oral tics. This is where, for example, you repeat some words like okay, giving instructions, for example, okay. Now let's look at this page, okay. It might be, it might have a certain function, but when we talk about oral tics, this is about repeating things without being aware. And these are very small words. It could be like good, very good, okay, and stuff like that. So also something useful, but usually it's minimal. So the examples that I shown to you are examples of saying more, which does have a bigger effect on students and learning, right? Whereas oral tics are kind of little things. They might just annoy people, right? But not in the way as these things can. Now, so we know a few examples of TTT, and I hope that you can recognize them in your own, maybe in your own teaching, or maybe when you observe other people, right? So again, that's a good step forward. Now let's think about reasons of excessive TTT. So basically, why do we say more than necessary? And in the chat box, please write only 2-3 words, choose one biggest reason, in your opinion, for unnecessary or excessive teacher talking time. All right. Okay, so looks like we have a variety of things. Oh, lovely. Excellent. Okay, great. So looks like I'm not going to tell you anything new on my next slide because you've mentioned the majority of the problems I have there, but still, let's have a look at some of them. So first of all, I think that the biggest, or maybe not the biggest, but one of the problems or reasons with TTT is or depends on personality, depending on personality. There are people who tend to speak more naturally, and there are people who tend to speak less. So I think that is one of the reasons that it's worth looking at, right? So put a plus in the chat box if you feel that you naturally speak more, and that might be the reason for unnecessary or excessive teacher talking time. Okay, lovely. So it looks like we have lots of people being aware that they usually speak more. So good news is that that's okay. right? And a better piece of news is that we can still work on it to optimize our teacher talking time, right? So if, for example, you're naturally prone to speaking more, right? So it might mean that there's something to be done about it in the first place. Next, some of you actually mentioned this point. I think this is about a habit, but there might be a habit that we don't recognize or don't see, right? Or we are not aware of. And usually when we talk about, for example, qualifications like the CELTA course and others, when you're told that you speak more than necessary, right, you become aware, right? So basically before someone tells us that we have unnecessary TTT, we don't recognize it. So again, this is the first step. We'll talk about what to do to raise our awareness in case we are not aware of this. But again, this is something that we don't recognize. And if we don't recognize it, there is no problem, right? So no high TTT. Next one. I think that sometimes excessive TTT happens because we made a decision to use some of these examples of TTT. And for example, when we talk about echoing, I've noticed, and there was a comment from a few trainees of mine in the past saying that, oh, well, I have a big room. And for example, students sitting at the end of the room cannot hear well what people or students sitting in front are saying. So that's why I'm repeating and saying things louder, because these students need to hear everything. I mean, sitting at the back. So that might be the reason, but I think that it's still possible to get rid of it by asking students to speak louder. So it might really depend. Also, I know that some people are used to speaking to larger audiences, right? And they tend to repeat things for a similar reason. So it's something that has developed because of another profession or job or responsibilities, another kind of job or responsibilities. So basically, this is something that was a conscious decision of a person, right? But we might say that, for example, TTT here can be reduced and should be reduced. Next one, if we talk about, for example, a teacher who is young and students who are older, there might be a problem of communicating in such situation because the teacher might seem disrespectful, right? So of course, like, for example, if I'm 25 and I have a student who is, for example, 45, of course, I'll try to be more respectful and I'll try to be more polite. And again, this adds to this teacher talking time because of age differences, right? So I also think that this has to do with some unconscious teacher beliefs, sometimes conscious, right? So saying less and using imperatives doesn't always mean that we are impolite or we don't respect people, right? This is about the distance that we set between us and the students. It might be useful at the beginning when we start, for example, working with such students. But I think as our communication with students develops, it's a good idea to try using short, for example, instructions and use imperatives. Next one, I think someone mentioned it, and this is something that is, in a way, a huge problem. So can you tell me if you are afraid of silence in the classroom, even for 5 seconds, and put a plus in the chat box? Okay. Right. Oh, some people have got rid of that. Lovely. Okay. All right. Yeah, I still see lots of pluses, which means that, again, this is our own attitude. Silence is a powerful tool and instrument in any language classroom, because when we give students, for example, time to think, what they produce after that is better than without this moment of silence. So, I mean, sometimes we have to just, sorry for this phrase, shut up, and this might bring in a positive result, right? So it's a good idea maybe to look at this silence and our attitude to it and maybe experiment with it. Changing it is difficult, but still. So one of the problems with TTT is actually because of being afraid of pauses, silence, and emptiness, right? This is especially true for online classes. Next one is something that some of you mentioned. This is a fear of being misunderstood. And by this, I mean, when we repeat the instructions or rephrase the instructions, automatically we think that students don't get us, right? So we think that they won't understand what they have to do, and that's why we repeat it. So this is a habit that might be kind of a conscious decision first, but then it becomes unconscious, right? Which is a bit difficult to deal with. So again, this is something to consider. Next one, I think lots of you mentioned the point about stress levels, and I absolutely agree with you. Actually, I have here a few examples. So when we talk about a first meeting with our students, high TTT is a must-have or must-do. I don't mean that we have to do it, but I think it's something that is inevitable, right? So because we are stressed, because we meet students for the first time, we don't know them. So basically kind of blank page, right? We don't know the students, how it's going to be, and we are afraid of this situation. So that's why we speak more. Also, when we talk about offline and online lessons, if we compare, for example, our own teaching, usually we tend to speak more online because there are some pauses for example, sending files if we use handouts, for example, sending students to breakout rooms, sharing screen, sharing the presentation. So there are technical moments which take time. And we have this natural urge to fill in this time. And I think this is connected with fear silence, sorry. So it means that in a way, we think that students might become disengaged, and that's why we try to fill in this pause with our talking. And also a very typical situation for the very first lessons on any training, where a participant is observed by a trainer, by other participants. So basically being in an absolutely new situation, very uncomfortable, right? So lots of new things. I think that here anxiety is like the deepest problem, right? The deepest cause, I would say, not the problem. So this is something that is natural. But if we talk about solutions, we'll talk about how to deal with some of the anxiety problems. So also there are some things that we can do to help us with that. And I absolutely loved a comment about planning. So I absolutely agree with it. So if, for example, we don't think about details of the lesson, we don't plan what we will say, and sometimes it's very useful, especially when we work with our TTT, right? So this situation leads to anxiety, to higher TTT. And when we talk about spontaneity, so when we haven't thought about something in detail, so basically we have to come up with things on the go, right? Which means that no thought leads to thinking on the go, and thinking and saying is a bit difficult if we're not trained to do so. So that's why having a plan, thinking about what we'll say, especially questions. I really like when questions are planned, not just the instructions, right? Are very important. Of course, this is something that should be developed and is a skill. And when we talk about, for example, our regular teaching, we don't have that much time to plan everything in detail. But if we know that our TTT is an issue for us, right? So then this is a good step to think about. All right, then in the chat, can you please type one more reason that you know that hasn't been mentioned so far, reason of excessive TTT? Students' misbehavior, complicated instructions, bad instructions, being told that way in the past. Yep, agree, right? Taking part in a conversation, sharing own experience, right? Higher status, that's a good point. Yeah, communication, more teaching, right? Talkativeness, right? Yeah, we talked about this thing in terms of personality a bit, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with your comments. So basically, when we talk about teacher talking time, there is always a reason for that, right? And one actually moment I see that Mohammed confusion, right? When we talk about some unexpected situations in the classroom, right? We as, I think that the majority of us are non-native speakers, which means that we might have not been in some difficult situations with students. Someone mentioned misbehavior, right? And sometimes it's difficult to come up with a good way to address it on the go. And that's why we might actually end up saying a lot, right? Yeah, so basically reacting in unexpected situations caused by, for example, students' behavior, for example. Right, exactly. Lovely, thank you very much for your idea so far. Right, classroom management, yeah, for sure, right. Okay, now, another point that we're going to look at is actually about consequences or pitfalls of effective teacher talking time. And this is something like a summary of what has been mentioned. So first of all, when we talk about instructions, which are long, right, they lead to lack of clarity, right? So basically it means that students won't be able to do the task. Students will ask us questions, right? As a result of this, the pace of the lesson drops, right? So instead of, for example, doing it, for example, giving instructions within 1 minute, it might take us 2 minutes, right? Students might wait for something, feel bored and stuff like this. And basically higher TTT means that sometimes this is wasted time if it's not effective. But again, there are different reasons for that. Also, when we talk about the result or the effect of this, I'd say that it does affect on learning. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but saying more doesn't always mean that students understand what they have to do, what's the essence or the meaning of what the teacher is trying to say. So that's why such misunderstanding might lead to basically poorer intake, so what students learn, right? And as a result, basically students might become unmotivated and disengaged, which in its turn results in discipline issues, right? So we talked about misbehavior. So in a way, TTT is a reason for discipline issues, right? Not always, right? But there are situations when, for example, students are disengaged, right? They have the time to do something, not what the teacher asks, right? And when we talk about for example, having regular classes with students, sometimes it might affect the dropout rate. So basically, students might decide to withdraw from the course or would like to transfer to another group or something like this. So TTT in a way does affect this situation as well. And are there any other consequences from your experience of high TTT? And again, can you please type in the chat a few words? Choose one consequence. Okay. A very nice point from Natalia. So saying more might mean that the teacher doesn't know what to do themselves. And yeah, and I agree that it might result in students might result in the impression that the teacher doesn't know what they're going to do. And I absolutely agree with that point. Right? Yeah, demotivation, yeah, timing, we mentioned. Sore throat, oh, lovely, okay, exactly, right? Yeah, not finishing lessons in time, right? Agree, so that's about basically having a goal or aim for a lesson, not being able to achieve this goal within the time we have, right? Which means that the process or the syllabus slows down, or the process of learning slows down, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, and absence of motivation, boredom. Yep, exactly right. Yeah, especially when we talk about younger learners, right? I mean, teenagers, for example. Yeah, boredom is a typical effect of higher TTT. Lovely. So thank you for helping me with your idea. So I'm actually going to pick a few more for myself. Yeah, depriving students from practicing. Exactly. Right. Yeah, lovely. Yep, thank you very much. Yeah, language practice is actually absence of language practice. A very good point. Yep, thank you. Now, I think a very interesting point coming next will be about solutions. So I'd like to offer you two groups of solutions. One will be a global solution. This has to do with beliefs, approaches, our attitude. So basically, this is something that takes time to change, to improve, to make different. And specific solutions are about something that we can do for each specific lesson, for any step of the lesson where we have problems with TTT. I remember at the beginning I mentioned when we talked about reasons, awareness. So when we talk about lack of awareness, so we don't know that this is a problem, it's important to make some steps to raise our own awareness, right? So basically, doing something to help us understand if, for example, we speak enough, we say enough, if students understand us. And we'll talk about more specific solutions a little bit later. Next one, related to planning. This is about preparation. A typical solution that we offer to our course participants on CELTA courses and other practical trainings. So this is about preparing. So when we talk about, for example, teacher talking time in instructions, a good idea is actually to write down what exactly we would like to say. So if, for example, we are setting up a reading task and students need to decide whether the statements are true or false based on the task. So we might say, for example, look at the text, read the text again, answer this or decide if these statements are true or false, write T or F next to each statement, right? You have 5 minutes for this. So I've just said some like 3 or 4 sentences, and looks like I mentioned only the essence. But do you think I can do it more or less nicely on the spot because I'm generally good at it, because I've learned to do it? What do you think? Is it something that I do naturally, or is it something that was learned? Actually, it's both. So on the one hand, in the classroom, usually I don't speak much, but on the other hand, this is a skill, right? So when we talk about writing down instructions, so this is like, remember our overpacked suitcase, right? When we start writing the instructions, of course, the first thing we'll write will be a long thing, right? But looks like it's a good idea to take some time and try to shorten it, right? As if, for example, we need to say not more than, for example, 25 words, right? Trying to rewrite it and get rid of something which won't be useful for the students. And a good idea is actually to rehearse it in front of the mirror, to maybe ask someone to listen to us and tell us if what we are saying is clear, right? So basically, this is some kind of rehearsal, like, for example, actors do before, for example, they perform on stage, right? There's lots of time spent on this rehearsal, and they have this dress rehearsal. This is where they do it for the final time before the actual performance, right? So with instructions or TTT, it might be the same thing. With questions, it might be a little bit different, but still, right? So the most important thing about TTT, many types of TTT, is about preparation, right? So planning and rehearsing. Next one is related to the attitude. So when we talk about TTT, this isn't something that can change overnight. Please don't expect to reduce your TTT over one day, one lesson, one stage of the lesson. This is something that should be worked on over a longer period of time. And our CELTA courses, we usually say that, oh, during the CELTA course, if a teacher uses or has a high TTT, it's difficult to get rid of everything during 1 month, for example, right? So it takes time. So being patient, understanding that it doesn't disappear overnight is really, really important. Next one is about silence. Remember, we talked about this. So basically, I'd suggest observing yourself in the lesson when you feel the urge to fill in the silence with your talk, right? So catch yourself in that moment. So why do you do that? So is it because you think that you have to fill in this silence because students might have this gap and might misbehave. So basically, you're trying to preempt or anticipate a problem with this, right? Sorry, solve a problem with it, right? You anticipate a problem and try to solve it. So basically, a good thing is to observe or to monitor yourself and your reactions in the classroom. And one more thing is about anxiety. So when we talk about anxiety, there might be different reasons for that, right? And we talked about, for example, being observed, your first class or other situations, right? So this is about trying to understand why you have this anxiety. So for example, some of you actually, I can recognize at least 10 people from our CELTA courses and 10 people that I know for sure. So when we talk about anxiety, usually we are anxious because, sorry, I lost my mind. Reasons of our anxiety. Yeah, so we need to understand why we have this anxiety and try to think about what helps us calm down. So for example, sometimes when I am anxious before a first meeting, and I'm usually anxious before I meet people for the first time, I'm an introvert, right? So I do some breathing exercises. For example, taking 2 minutes and breathing in deeply and breathing out deeply. Switching off everything outside, trying to block any background noise. Another one could be, for example, 4 squares. When you, for example, breathe in, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, then stop 1, 2, 3, 4, then breathe out 1, 2, 3, 4, and stop again. And you need to have at least 4 cycles like this, right? So you might take a few minutes before your lesson to calm down, right? Of course, this depends on your reactions, whether you're, for example, more introverted or extroverted, right? This is about the amount of stimulation, right? But a good idea is to observe yourself why you have this anxiety. Knowing the reason makes it a bit easier to understand how to deal with it. I think it's something related to psychology more than to anything else. Next one, let's talk about very specific solutions. So we talked about raising awareness. So one of the most obvious ones is about audio video recording your lessons, right? If you don't know whether this is a problem or you don't know to what extent this is a problem, audio video recording yourself is very useful. The only thing is that we need to make sure that, sorry, looks like I'm speaking a bit too fast now. We need to ask our students for permission if we video record this, right? I think that in our current situation, when we teach online, like it's impossible to record without students knowing that, right? But it's a very useful source of analysis, right? Especially because usually we're not aware fully of what's happening in the lesson because we are in the moment. We're focusing on what to say, how to say, the student's reaction and anything. So it might go unnoticed because of that. Next one, a good idea might be to invite your colleagues to observe your lesson and give you feedback on the TTT, the kinds of TTT, where you use more than necessary, where it's enough, and what to do with that, right? It might be a more experienced colleague. Next one, my top favorite for offline classes. This is about anchoring. So when you teach a class with students offline, you might be standing or might be going to and fro, moving from the right to the left and stuff like this, which is evidence of anxiety, right? When we sit down or when we lean on the chair, on the table, we kind of fixate our position. And from what I know psychologically, it helps us calm down. So basically, find a point to fixate your position and then continue saying or speaking. Saying what you have to say, sorry. So basically this anchoring or fixating position helps us ease or let's say reduce our anxiety. Next one, a bit more challenging, but some problems with TTT are related to how quickly we speak. And you've noticed me quickening my speech as well, probably, right? And inserting pauses in between the sentences. For example, read the text again. Decide if these statements are true or false. Write letters T and F next to each statement. You have 5 minutes for this, right? So when we speak slower, right, this increases understanding of what we are saying. So again, something useful, and I think it's really related to rehearsing, right? So while rehearsing, we actually can force us to slow down and to include pauses in between the sentences. And one very practical thing about decreasing or reducing teacher talking time is about increasing student involvement. Remember at the beginning, we're commenting on the point about a balance between teacher talking time and student talking time. So how can we increase student involvement or student talking time? In the chat, please write just a few words, 2 or 3, your ideas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with your points here. So this is about including pair work activities, asking students to work in groups, exactly. And I have a nice suggestion here about ICQs or just asking questions. Yeah. Yeah, so basically interacting with students rather than saying, right, role play, yeah, different kinds of speaking activities, yeah. So basically planning opportunities for students to talk to or to work with each other rather than us speaking and saying more. Right, exactly, lovely. No. So far, we've been talking about excessive TTT, so basically about the amount of time that teachers talk in the lesson, right? But do you think that's it? So is that all about our participation in the lesson? So is amount of what we say the only problem with what we say in the classroom? Or are there any other things that we need to consider in terms of our participation in the lesson? Yeah, hello from Kiev. Right. Okay. So actually we are going to talk about another perspective or another view on teacher talking time and actually make it wider. So now let's think a bit more globally. The time we talk is only one dimension, one side. And what we say in the classroom is actually a bit bigger and wider. So basically, let's look at what we say in the classroom using a helicopter view, and we'll call it teacher talk. Right? So all the possible uses of what we say in the classroom. And the question here, so if we speak less, so does it mean that what we say is effective? So what do you think? Can you please type yes or no? Okay, lovely. So I think that almost unanimously, you said no with some occasional yeses. It depends, of course. Yeah, for sure. There are exceptions as always. Right. Yeah. So looks like we have more no answers rather than yes answers. Right. So basically saying less might not solve the problems with how we use our teacher talk in the lesson. And let's look at this quotation. I'll give you 30 seconds to read it. Right. So looks like not only how much we say results in whether the lesson will be effective or no, but also how we say and what we say, right? So TTT is only part of, I would say, a bigger iceberg, right? So when we talk about what we say in the lesson, and it's something quality or something qualitative, right? We'll call it quality talking time or quality teacher talk, sorry, right? So this is basically about saying or using our teacher language or participation effectively, right? So basically one of the ideas of this webinar is to introduce you to the quality talk rather than the problem with the amount of what we say. And let's have a look at these two examples of teacher talk. Oops, sorry. Let's look at the first example of teacher talk. So what do you think about this? Is it a good example or no? Please type just yes or no in the chat. So you're saying it's no. Okay, yes, it's me, Julie, right. Okay. Yeah, okay, so looks like the teacher is describing what's in the picture and what's the situation around it, right? So is this description focused on the teacher or on the students? Yeah, looks like it's more focused on the teacher. And I would say that this is teacher focused because of this. So the teacher is explaining, and explaining usually results in lower engagement levels. So it might mean because the teacher is saying a lot, right? Students might disengage, switch off, and other things. So it might be effective. It depends on, for example, how the teacher is using the picture, how the teacher is projecting their voice, what intonation they're using. There are other ways to engage students, right? But just talking where we have a picture might not be enough to involve students. And how about this one? Yes, student-centered, eliciting, way better. Love the comment. Okay. Yeah. So with kids, I wouldn't say it's useful only with kids. So when we talk about asking questions, looks like we are focusing on students more, right? By eliciting, by getting ideas from them. We speak less as a result. And when students answer the questions, they involve cognitively. So instead of just passively listening, they start thinking, oh, so what I can see in the picture, right? So what else could it be? So basically we switch on our thinking, right? And are engaged cognitively. So basically we start intellectual processes in our mind, right? We start being active, which is more engaging. So we can say that teacher talk can be teacher focused, teacher talk can be student focused, right? And these are two different approaches. So when we use the first example, so looks like students are less engaged. When we use the second one, students are usually more engaged. Again, this depends on how we use these approaches. And also basically the approach to using the picture is a little bit different. So looks like I'm going to take 5 extra minutes of your time in addition to this time. Is this okay? Can you put a plus in the chat? Okay, lovely. I like your enthusiasm. Lovely. Okay, so let's not waste our time. I'm reducing my TTT now. Okay, so on the next slide, you'll see 2 examples of teacher talk. Your task will be to decide which of them is quality teacher talk. And write in the chat what you think. So for example, write only A or only B, which is quality teacher talk. Oh, looks like someone is writing on my screen. Okay, yeah, I guess everyone agrees that this is B. Okay, yeah, absolutely agree with you. So when we talk about B, the language is simpler, especially when we consider the situation, right? These are pre-intermediate level students. The simpler language we use, the higher are the chances that students understand us. Exactly. So this is about the quality of our teacher talk. Lovely. Next situation. Only A or only B? Okay. Oh, interesting. The ideas are divided here. We have both A and B. Okay. So let me explain the context here. The teacher has just presented new vocabulary on the topic, right? And another task or another stage is coming. This is the stage of practicing. So the teacher might say, let's do another task, or let's see how you have learned new words. So I think that the second one, I mean B, is better, because this bridge or transition between the stages is meaningful. We don't just say, let's do another task, let's have another one. A lesson isn't a series of tasks. A lesson is a connection of stages, of activities, right? And we talk about the context of the whole lesson. So in order to connect the stages, it's a good idea to say something meaningful. Now, we have looked at some new language. Now let's practice it, right? It does mean that we say more, but at the same time, this is something useful, something meaningful, especially when we talk about, for example, adults. They prefer to know why they're doing things rather than just being told to do something, right? So this makes a meaningful transition to a new stage. Okay, next one and another voting time. Just A or B? Okay, the ideas are divided again. Lovely. Okay, it looks like we're going to learn something today. Okay. So let's look at situation B. The teacher reacts to what the student is saying good. Do you think this conversation has a chance of continuing? Or is it an end, the end of the conversation? Yeah, looks like this is the end. So looks like this conversation has stopped because there was no meaningful reaction from the teacher. And in the first one, the teacher actually elicits or asks questions to get to know more. That's why I'd say that the first situation is an example of more meaningful communication or interaction. So I'd say that the word like good is a conversation killer in some situations, when instead of reacting to the content, we're just accepting the idea, saying like, okay, you said something. Right, okay, now another situation. Okay. B. All right. So looks like you've learned a good thing from the previous situation. I absolutely agree with you. So the difference is that in situation A, the teacher doesn't exploit students' ideas, right? Okay, the student said something, right? But looks like the teacher just accepted the fact, right? There was no deepening in what the student has said. So it looks like in the second situation, the teacher kind of digs deeper. The teacher wants to hear more. The teacher doesn't accept a simple answer, right? And we also ask open questions, not just yes or no, because open questions tend to elicit more information from the students if they are ready to share. Lovely. Okay, I have a real evidence of learning now. And one more situation. All right, so looks like 97% from my rough estimation have chosen B. I agree with B because I feel that there is a difference in the questions that are asked. So if we compare why do we use it and is it about the past, these are two different kinds of questions. The first one is an open question. And I'm not sure that students are ready to explain if this is a new piece of grammar. Right? So it looks like this open question requires a lot to say. Students are not ready, and as a result, in this situation, they're silent. In the second question, we use closed questions, yes or no questions, and we are, in a way, guide students toward the answer, right? So it's easier. When we talk about clarifying grammar, checking understanding of grammar, the second approach is usually more preferable. So that's why I'd say that the second example is an example of quality talking time. Right. Okay. So now I'd like you to think about what you have learned today and what you would like to use in your everyday practice. And in the chat, type one thing that you've learned about TTT or QTT, or one thing that you'd like to change about your TTT or QTT. Let's have 1-2 minutes for that. Very briefly, just a few words per point. Yeah, if you've learned about QTT, can you specify what exactly you've learned about it? Lovely. Looks like by the quality of your comments in the chat, I can say that my TTT was something like QTT. At least I hope so, right? And if you have any questions about the things that we've discussed today, can you please type them in the chat, and I'll allow some time now to answer the questions. And while you're typing, a few important things. So when we talk about professional development, actually, the Great Education Center has a few opportunities for you to do this in the near future. So first of all, we'll have a masterclass later this month on 21st of December about writing for teenagers. Right, and another one, if you are thinking about participating in the CELTA course, so basically taking a chance and participating in the pre-CELTA training day will be a useful undertaking. So you will be shared, we will share with you the presentation slides, and there you will be able to click on the links. And if you're interested in these activities, please do so. And if you have any questions, so I'm ready to answer them now. So for those of you who have to leave now, yeah, I'll send the links in the presentation slides. So I'd like to thank you very much for being really active. So thank you very much for your contributions and adding to my ideas. So actually I'll update my slides so you have your take here. I hope that your TTT is slowly becoming or has already become QTT, and wish you effective lessons, lower TTT and only QTT. Yes, so after the webinar, we will send you an email with a link to the recorded webinar, and you'll also be sent a certificate of participation, of attendance. So thanks a lot, everyone. I'm still here to answer your questions, if you have any. Okay, looks like everyone is tired of my QTT. So thank you for now. Wish you good luck and hope to see you sometime soon on our webinars. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening too. Goodbye.